Hello and welcome to this bite-sized video for the Digital Support Services T-Level, where we'll explore Assignment 1 for the Network Cabling Occupational Specialism, or OS for short. So this session has been delivered by myself, Helen Scanlon, part of the Provider Development Team, and I'll be taking you through the assessment requirements, regs and conditions. I'm joined by our Digital Sector Manager, James Lane, who is here to add his subject specialist knowledge and experience. So hello, James, and thank you for collaborating with me on this.
Hi, Helen, and thanks for having me. Like Helen said, I'm going to be bringing some of the technical side to this and adding a little bit more context into the task. I'm sure I've met most of you before, but if you require any additional support, please do reach out through the team. We can help with that as well.
Thanks, James. Okay, we'll get started then. This OS assessment consists of 3 task-based assignments and is designed to assess the 3 performance outcomes that are shown on the screen now, each of which indicates the knowledge and skills required to enable students to achieve threshold competence in the chosen occupational specialism. For each performance outcome, there will be a list of knowledge and skills. The knowledge statements identify what the students need to know, and the skills identify what the students need to demonstrate and perform. Some of this content will build upon the core content delivered in Year 1. We're going to be explaining the first OS assignment on this recording, and we'll be signposting you to the important documents and information on the NCFE website, the first of which are the key date schedule and the qualification-specific instructions for delivery. At the end of this recording, we'll share the relevant links, including the ones to these 2 documents. Taken from the tutor guidance support documentation, the information we'll provide should help teachers to understand the requirements of the summative assessment activities for each specialism. There are important factors to consider for these assessments, which you can see on the screen now. And for this assignment, please do take note of the assessment requirements. And as we progress through the detail of each assessment, we'll highlight any additional conditions that staff should be aware of. So the occupational specialisms are assessed through a series of synoptic assignments, which have been developed to be as occupationally realistic as possible, and they're externally set by NCFE. This slide provides an overview of all the OS assessments for network cabling, along with their allowed timings for each assessment. This video is going to focus on assignment 1, and the tasks for this are about designing a new network and creating a network diagram. So let's get started. Assignment 1 consists of 2 separate tasks that occur on a fixed date and time specified by NCFE. The dates for each task can be found in our key dates schedule. And for the Summer 2025 series, the dates are shown on the screen now. Students will work independently under supervised conditions. Internet access is not allowed, and the students will need to be provided with word processing software. And before starting task 2, they will need to have access to a printed copy of their work from task 1. If students have any access arrangements or reasonable adjustments, such as additional time for assessments, then providers should apply that internally and increase the task times by the relevant amount. The assessment material should only be available to the students during the scheduled session, so do take into account this and ensure you have secure storage areas for the students' evidence. This screenshot from the provider guide shows which resources students will need to be provided with for both tasks. James, I'm going to bring you here in to add anything that you might think would be worthwhile to highlight.
Absolutely, yeah, there's probably a couple of things worth focusing on here. I think on the last slide, you mentioned about internet access not being allowed, and I think it's worth just exploring that for a second. And it's really within the spirit of the student being able to recall their skills and experience from the course for the last couple of years. If you combine that with the requirement for something like word processing software, there could be scenarios whereby that word processing software requires an internet connection if it were a cloud-based solution, for example. So there's a bit of overlap there. So if in doubt, I would encourage centres to reach out to the assessment delivery team to explore that in a little bit more detail. Also, it's unusual for us to name a specific vendor, and you see that on this screen with Cisco Packet Tracer. And that's realistically because that's the format that we're going to require it in. There's not really an alternative for this type of activity that we can accept. So normally you may have heard of referred to things just as like operating systems, and we don't specify any particular version or brand. So this is a little bit out of the norm. It's nothing to be concerned with, just worth highlighting at this point.
Lovely, thank you, James. So assignment 1 is worth a total of 60 marks, and marks are awarded against the skills and knowledge performance outcomes shown. Students will have a total of 8 hours to use the information in the assignment brief to carry out the work required and demonstrate their knowledge and skills. There are 40 marks allocated for this first task, and all POs are assessed, and you can see which marks are allocated on the screen now. James, can I ask you to summarise typical project brief and activities for this?
Yeah, so for this scenario, let's use the original design blueprint. So this is the original assessment that was never designed to be sat. But again, I think centres will see a commonality amongst the structure of the two tasks within this assignment continually throughout the original blueprint design and the past papers. So I'm just going to use that original scenario. So we're in a doctor's surgery. It's a small single-story building. The building has got a reception area and 3 surgery rooms. There's ample power sockets. Let's see, we've got 6 doctors. The doctors require access to all medical records and the appointment system, but the reception staff only require access to the appointment system. That's just a super high level skip over, but what you'll hear in there is suddenly it will start defining certain actions that are required for the students. They have to think about how to cable that, how to think about access permissions and that kind of thing. So within task 1, you've already mentioned they're designing a network. So we want the student to think about the elements, the structure, and even the topology of that network, thinking about what type of cable they might use. So I suppose what I really want to draw out here is just as an example that when we think about types of cable, there's not really a wrong answer, but what we want the student to really do is to explain how they've arrived at that particular element. And it's sort of the showing you're working out. That's where the marks are for us. It's having them think about it and provide that rationale. So as they're identifying all the elements, it's really important they say, I'm going to include this and here's why. So task 1 is around the design element.
Thanks, James. And finally, you can see a summary of what evidence the students will need to produce, and of course the centres will need to submit to NCFE for marking. Okay, moving on to the second task for this assignment, related to creating the network diagram. The students have a total of 5 hours to complete this task at a set date and time, and again, the summer 2025 dates can be seen on the screen now. These change each year, so please do check the key date schedule we mentioned earlier. And then moving on to the assessment requirements. Again, internet access is not allowed, and students will also need to be provided with word processing software and a locally installed version of Cisco Packet Tracer. Moving on to the task in more detail, the marks awarded and how they relate to the performance outcomes can be seen on the screen now. And I'm going to go back to James for a talk through of what the students will do for this task.
Thanks. So building on, obviously based on the design of task 1, we're now going to go into Cisco Packet Tracer and we're going to create the actual network. So we're looking to produce a network diagram, looking for the logical layout for this particular doctor's surgery or whatever scenario you choose to use. And we're asking to think about all of those devices that they've mentioned in task 1, thinking about the connection points, think about all of those elements that are required within that design. And that's got to be input into Cisco Packet Tracer. We've got to think about the resources that have been identified in task 1, thinking about the IP addressing structure, any kind of security measures, and how all of those components need to all come together to make the most efficient network. So maybe that's a good point actually to distinguish between where those grey boundaries sit. You know, a pass is perhaps going to look like a perfectly adequate network, but a distinction may be defined as that student really thinking about future proofing and that kind of stuff.
Lovely, thanks, James. And then last of all, a short overview there of the required evidence for submission by each of the students as well. So this slide shows the section of the website you'll find the support and the sample assessment materials on. This includes specimen assignment briefs, guide standard exemplification materials, including sample student assignments showing what a pass and a distinction looks like for each of the sample assignments. And you'll also find the previous live assessments here as well. We've also included the links to the current QSID and the key date schedule, which can also be found on the NCFE website. James, just going to come back to you before we finish. Is there anything else you'd like to add, please?
Maybe just to highlight, you've already touched on the specimen assessment materials. That would be my main focal point. I think obviously we know that the OSAs, the occupational specialism assessments, are a combination of all of the knowledge from the core and the occupational specialism. And that's fair to say, but I think it's really useful for students to have gone through this assessment type ahead of time. So I would encourage all centres to have a look at the resources you've got on screen there. Go through either the blueprint SAMs, so the original ones we designed, or any past papers, or frankly all of them, and show those to students. Go through a marking process, show them where they're missing out on marks, go through the grade boundaries, and sort of treat it as an assessment activity and show them where they're missing out on getting those extra marks. And that's the best prep for any student. So I would definitely direct you to those resources.
Great, totally agree with that. Thank you, James. Okay, then we've reached the end of the session now. We hope you've found it useful and have a better understanding of assignment 1. And do also see the other bite-sized videos that form part of this OS specialism series. And please do scan the QR code that you can see on the screen now to lead us feedback on today's session. Thank you and goodbye.